have so many papers this time that possibly you can't be at all the sessions, but we will be having a post-conference proceedings to share with all of you very soon. Without any delay, I would like to invite our chief guests for this morning. May I please request Lieutenant General A.K. Singh, Mr. Shekhar, Dr. Sani, Dr. Keshav, and Mr. Michael O'Connell to please come on the stage and join us. I'm sure some of you have had the opportunity to meet Lieutenant General Ajay Kumar Singh last evening, but for those who have not, he's our very newest addition to the Jindal University. Previously, he was serving with the Indian Army in the Armed Forces, and post that, he held several administrative positions, prominent among which was being the Lieutenant Governor of Puducherry and Andaman and Nicobar Islands. So we're indeed very fortunate to have his guidance and support to our university, and we welcome him wholeheartedly to our campus. I'm sure all of you are familiar with Dr. Sani. He's basically the force behind this entire institution that's organizing it, as well as one of our biggest supporters and someone who has birthed the vision of this conference all since when it started, the first chapter of it. Also, Mr. Shekhar Dutt is a very prominent name in the Indian scene. He's one of our returning delegates, actually, and we're very fortunate that he comes to our campus that often. He is a prominent IAS officer and former governor of Chhattisgarh. He's also held positions as the Chancellor of 11 state universities and as a visitor to 6 private universities. He was also a prominent member as a Deputy National Security Advisor and members in the Defense Secretary of Government of India. Basically, he's held a lot of positions, prominent positions. I will not be listing all of them. But we are so fortunate to have him here on this dais with us. And as for Mr. Michael O'Connell, he started as a police officer, and I guess that is where his interest in victim impact and assistance came in, and he went on to hold other positions in the National Victim of Crime Working Group, which has developed the National Framework of Victim Rights and Victim Systems in South Australia. Currently, he's the Commissioner of Victim Rights and a member of the Executive for the World Society of Victimology. And we are very pleased that he has taken the time out from his busy schedule and very important work to travel all the way to India. I think he arrived last night. So thank you so much for coming to India and for visiting us at this university special conference. We look forward to hearing a lot from you. And last but not the least, Professor Joe Keshav, who has been a valuable addition to our university since last year. Thanks to him, we are hosting the prestigious postgraduate course this year on victimology, and he has been a major guidance in this field, and we're so intrigued. I don't have to introduce him further. If you're here for a victimology conference, you know he's the father of victimology. So he needs no introduction, except that we are really glad that he's a part of us. So moving the occasion forward, we would like to do a very traditional ritual, which is part of the Indian University, especially our Indian culture, is the lighting of this beautiful lamp that is here. For those who are not aware, fire is considered as a very purifying element, a very auspicious element in Indian culture, Indian tradition, and the lighting of the lamp is very crucial in learning as a way of dispelling the darkness of ignorance. So, given that we will be learning a lot of new things, that's what conferences are all about, I would request our dignitaries to please step forward. and illuminate the room with the wisdom that is to follow in the next 2 days. Now may I please request Dr. Sani to please come welcome you all officially to the conference.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. First of all, a heartiest welcome to Jindal Global University. I will just tell you about this university. We are only 8 years old. The way the Harvard or the Stanford established, we have also been established the same way through the philanthropic initiative of Mr. Jindal from Jindal Group. And he wanted to establish the university in India, which can be a world-class university, and especially competing with the top 200 universities in the world. With that kind of objective in mind, we have established this university. We established this university in 2009 with the Jindal Global Law School with 117 students and 13 faculty members. In 2010, we started School of Business. In 2011, we started School of International Affairs. 2012, we started School of Government and Public Policy. And 2013, we started the School of Liberal Arts and Humanities. We thought these 5 schools are good enough. We wanted to be a mini Princeton of India. But then we realized that we were getting many calls and requests that we should start and having more schools. So then this year we started School of Journalism and Communication, and next year we are also starting School of Arts and Architecture. And we have a plan till 2023 to start various other schools, which comprises of School of Environment and Climate Change, School of Psychological Sciences, and School of Finance and Business, and so on. How we say that this is a global university? We don't have only the global curriculum. We don't have only the global faculty, which is from over 30 countries. We have roughly 55 foreign faculties. When I say foreign faculty, means non-Indian passport holders. They stay here with us and from past many years, and they have built this institution with us. We have a collaboration with now roughly over 200 universities and institutes in the world with over 50 countries. And we have a summer schools, winter schools, we have a virtual classrooms with Harvard, Stanford, or any other university. That gives us a sense of globalization. Now coming to the Jindal Institute of Behavioral Sciences, we are only 3-year-old. But under the Jindal Institute of Behavioral Sciences, the Center for Victimology and Psychological Studies is 7 years old. Because this particular topic was introduced to me by the father and the son. And father is, you all know him very well, Professor Chokalingam, and his son, Professor Rajkumar, is the Vice Chancellor of this university. And I thought the psychology composition is missing in victimology to a certain extent. That is why I thought it is more important to provide a psychological and emotional support to the victims. Yes, compensation and other things are important, and that is why I thought that if we provide this psychology into it, it will be even a better world. I'm very happy today to see all of you. We are having roughly 300 conference delegates, and we also have 50 people from probably over 9 countries who are attending our course. But I'm also very unhappy today this morning when I saw on a dais only 5 male members are sitting and a female is missing. And we talk about victim assistance. My apologies to the females around that it's my fault, and we will make sure an equal participation, if not more, in future, because I know fully, unless we are going to empower, unless the woman comes in front, victim assistance is not possible, whether it is a home or an institution or a university. So my apologies for that today. This beautiful university, I'm sure you are enjoying from past few days. We have various facilities which I would request you to use it. We have an excellent global library. Please, use that facility. Sports facilities, health facilities, gymnasium, you name anything, it will be provided to you. And I'm sure the next 2 days are going to be very fruitful. And all of us together, we are going to learn and we are going to make a better world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. That is indeed very empowering, given that in the light of the current discussions globally, one of the famous Supreme Court judges from the US has stated when she was asked how many women judges would be appropriate on the Supreme Court, US Supreme Court, which is a bench of 9 members, she said 9. Because the world so far has never had a problem with an all-male bench, so they shouldn't have a problem with an all-female bench. So I'm so glad that we are resonating with that sentiment. It makes us feel really proud to be a part of such an institute. Thank you very much. And now may I request Lieutenant General A.P. Singh to please come on the dais and speak a few words.
All the distinguished guests and speakers on the dais, distinguished delegates and participants, and all those attending the course here. I'm not an expert on the subject, but can share a few views as an informed and concerned citizen of the country. To start with, a very warm welcome, which Dr. Sani has already done so. A very warm welcome not only to India but to Jindal Global, one of our premier institutes in the country, and we hope is and will become a premier institute on the world education scene. Most of us have dealt with victims in one form or the other, but never within a defined framework or institutional framework. We have individual experiences and individual views. As we march into the 21st century, with all the benefits of technology and modern processes and best practices to the fore, the human dimension has had both a positive and a negative connotation. And the negative dimension certainly relates to victimization. And I would refer especially here to the victimization of the weaker sections of society, especially those who are on the fringes of a developing country like India. Whilst victimology, or the subject as such, doesn't distinguish based on caste, creed or status, most of the victims, at least we have seen in India, are obviously from the lower strata, where literacy rates and societal norms are weak. This subject therefore has great relevance to our country and to all other countries of a similar nature. As most of you would know, Indian society is deeply feudalistic still in some form, though we are a democratic country with strong patriarchal norms. Given that the societal norms and structures are heavily tilted against women, they mostly suffer in silence. Equal rights and greater awareness, on which there has been a great stress, are generating their own set of problems leading to conflict, aggressive behavior and violence. Caste is another lingering issue, including untouchability and manual scavenging. While there has been much progress in these fields in our country, the problem still remains. Children are another vulnerable section who need greater protection, not only from outsiders, but even from the closely inside family, as we have seen in many cases. Whilst adequate laws exist for prevention and safeguarding, their implementation, at least in our country, leaves much to be desired. In my view, the problem can be classified as under. Firstly, a lack of awareness and sensitivity on the part of the law enforcing agencies. Lack of societal norms and pressure to prevent victimization, especially of the weaker sections. A false sense of family honor, where hushing up or living in denial is considered a viable option. Lack of avenues for ease of filing complaints for the victims. And most important, the delay and harassment that a victim goes through in our judicial system, whether knowingly or inadvertently, which deters most victims to take the case to a logical conclusion. I will narrate a very peculiar and interesting case which occurred in Andaman while I was there for 3 years, sometimes in 2015. As most of you would be aware, we have 6 tribes who live in Andaman, apart from the settlers, out of which 5 are particularly vulnerable tribes. And the prominent among them are the Jaravas, who live north of the capital, Port Blair. And they live in a 1,000 square kilometer reserved area with a highway passing next door and a lot of settlers around them, thereby generating a conflict situation between the settlers and these tribes. And in 2015, while there are very stringent laws which the government and the administration always tries to implement, there are ongoing violations. In 2015, a very interesting case came up to me, where one of these settlers who had gone into unauthorizedly entered this reserve forest, and he had impregnated a Jarava girl. A child was born, and later we came to know that the child had been killed by the men in that tribe. Now when the Retribution police came to me, I asked him, I said, how do you look at this case? Obviously the victims were certainly the child, the mother, maybe the tribe as a whole. And the perpetrator, of course, was the settler who had gone unauthorizedly into the area, and also the Jarava men who had killed this boy. But the Jaravas don't understand the law of the land. They probably follow the tribal customs. So it was a case for which there was no easy solution. And all the guidance that I could give to the Director General Police was, please proceed very sensitively, since it involves people who are still living in a different era. And I hope I just narrate this because we cannot typecast victimology or the experience of victims into strict silos. And every case is peculiar. But those who deal with these victims, who provide succor to these victims, I would suggest a simple ethos of share and care. I think if we were as a society to follow the norm of share and care, I think we would be able to provide a large amount of relief to such victims. And it's not just the government or the law enforcing agencies or the NGOs who need to get involved in this. I think there needs to be a greater awareness in the society as such. And all of us as citizens of this country, or any country, need to come forward to give a helping hand. You cannot have, none of us likes the sight of a victim lying, of a hit and run case lying on the road. and people taking selfies or taking a picture rather than helping that victim. Of course, much has been done to ease the laws in India. Earlier, people were afraid to go to the help of the victim because they thought that they would get roped into a tedious legal process. Laws have been changed, and today, I think the person who provides assistance is given enough assurance that he will not be harassed by law. And we hope that with the changes of law, with greater sensitivity coming into our society, with greater awareness, with greater literacy coming into our society, that the case of victims will not only reduce, but we will be able to assist those who find themselves in this unfortunate position. I would just end here and wish your deliberations great success. I see so many experts who are here, and thank you very much, and all the best.
Thank you, General Singh. Before I request Michael O'Connor, who is a very good friend of this university and of us, I want to put it on record the outstanding contribution in terms of organizing this course. The credit goes to Michael O'Connor because this course is being recognized by the World Society of Victimology. So we are very lucky that Professor Marc was here, who is the president of the World Society of Victimology, in the inauguration of the course, and we are very happy the Secretary General, Michael O'Connor, is here for the inauguration of the conference. Michael O'Connor, please.
No PowerPoint this morning. Namaste. Thank you, people, and I use the word people deliberately, because victimology is a social science. It's also a movement of people who are interested in the plight of victims, in the scientific disciplines of studying victimisation and the causes of victimisation. And among its objectives is to eradicate intolerance and to bring about tolerance, to eradicate injustice and bring about justice, to eradicate or eliminate discrimination and bring about equity. If there was a broad base of social norms that were acceptable to all peoples of this world, and I'm sure there are, even this morning, the symbolism of lighting the candle, every one of the major faiths of the world, and I use the word faith deliberately rather than religion, but every one of the major faiths of the world, the lighting of a candle plays a significant role. It plays a significant role in terms of suggesting a new beginning. It suggests a way forward when there is tragedy. It suggests that together with our scholarship and our devotion, that we can achieve a better place for all of us to share. So I thank you, people, for your travels from across the world, from here within India. This is only my second time here, and I know travel just within India is not of ease for many of you. Many, many hours spent on roadways and in trains, in airports, likewise those of you internationally. So on behalf of the World Society of Victimology, I thank you for your endeavours. I thank you for your passion. I thank you for your scholarship. I thank you for your willingness to gather here, to share ideas, to become part of an international body that is keen in leaving a footprint that is better for the next generation in this world. These are not my ideas. They're the ideas that were fostered in me when I was a young police officer. And I happened then in the 1990s to meet a person who sits to my left, Professor Grojhuisen, and some other professors who had come together in the early 1970s and decided to convene an international symposium. The symposium, the legacy of which is reflected triennially, and the next symposium will be in 2018 in Hong Kong, a special governing area of China. In 1973, those people started the first symposium. In 1979, 6 years later, they decided that the other ways that they could promote victimology was to come together and form an international body. An international body that since then has attained statusship, consultative statusship with the United Nations, attained statusship with the European Union, among others, and strong affiliations with academic institutions such as OP Jindal, and hence our pleasure in endorsing both the victimology course and also the international conference that all of you people are gathered at. More than 1 billion people per year become victims of crime throughout our world, and many, many more people become victims of abuse of power by institutions and by individuals. There is a great cause and great need for us to be interested in the plight of victims, not just victims of crime, but as the program shows, victims of natural disasters, victims of all forms of harm that is done. It's important that we share the ideas. It's important, however, that those ideas are informed and explored by scientifically appropriate methods. In those who work in the victim assistance area, one of the underlying principles is to do no more harm. How do they know that they're doing no more harm? They know because they can turn to the work of the scholars, those who are involved in scientific endeavour. One of the things, therefore, that the World Society of Victimology provides is a forum, an opportunity for people both involved in the delivery of victim assistance, involved in the practical, material, psychological and other forms of assistance for victims with scholars, so that, as I said in my introductory remarks, we can walk forward knowing that we are doing no more harm, and that in an intergenerational sense we have left a sound footprint with a promise of hope, of a better world for all of us people to share. I welcome you here, I thank you for your travels, and I wish you well with the endeavours of this conference. Thank you and good morning.
Because I keep forgetting things, I'm an old man now. Another thing which World Society of Victimology has given to us to organize this course in the, this is 16th symposium? Yes. 16th World Society of Victimology Symposium in City University, Hong Kong. It will be the OP Jindal Global University, and the World Society of Victimology will organize a 2-week program, a course in City University, Hong Kong. So thank you, Michael, for that. Now let me introduce you to the chief guest of the function. He's my mentor, he's my guru, I love him. In fact, he was my boss. And the boss, which was very accessible all the time and shaped my life as well. He was the Director General of Sports Authority of India when I was a sports psychologist or a sports scientist working there. But a very renowned bureaucrat. He worked in the army also for a few years. And then he retired as the Defense Secretary of the Government of India. And then he also became a governor of Chhattisgarh. And I know since Jindal has a lot of plans as well as the corporate social responsibilities in the Chhattisgarh area, and he has given various suggestions which really apt for the victim assistance as well. That is what I thought. Nobody else fit into this position of the chief guest as Mr. Shekhar Dutt. Mr. Shekhar Dutt, please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Honorable members sitting on the dais, my friend Dr. Sani, who spoke so eloquently about me, which even I don't know very much. Others also spoke before me, and I'm really impressed by the knowledge and the sagacity of some of the speakers who have pointed out what victimization essentially means and what are the dimensions. I would start by suggestion actually on this, that we go back to our past, and our ancestors have laid down, ancestors in India, have laid down some very, very simple pathway for us. One of them is in Sanskrit. It says, Sarve bhavantu sukhina, Sarve santu niramaya, Sarve bhadrani pashyanti, ma kaschid dukh bhag bhavet. Sarve bhavantu niramaya. It says that the entire community, and when you expand the community, region, people, everybody should be happy. Sarve bhavantu sukhina. Everybody should be happy. Then it says, Sarve bhavantu, Sarve santu niramaya. Everybody should be healthy. Now, our ancestors have really defined the path that this society should be consisting of people who should be happy and they should be healthy. And then the bounty the nature gives should be shared, and the path is very clear. Well, as it happened, the path wasn't all that clear, and there were people who required attention. They could be called victims of all kinds of things, including circumstances, victims of others' ambition, victims of people who want to take the land, other positions, victims of people who, out of malevolence, harm these victims. So there was a sage in the 19th century and early 20th century, a person called Swami Vivekananda. He very simply said this one line. He said that I worship the God who the ignorant call man. मैं उस भगवान को पूजा करता हूँ जिसे अज्ञानी लोग मनुष्य कहते हैं. Serving man or serving mankind is the purpose of those who can afford to serve, those who can give. And that is very necessary, because ultimate objective of the society is that man, or man includes woman, person should be happy. And how do we do that? We have to bring in a feeling of how to serve the common person. This can be done extremely well by the philosophy by which a soldier goes on. And what does the soldier do? Because he has to win. A soldier can win only if he can perceive what the other side is thinking. He has to wear the shoes of the person on the other side. So if you want to serve the human being, you have to wear the shoes of the person of the other side. You have to empathize and understand what the person feels. How is the society or the circumstance making that person feel or person experience inconvenience? Now, if that is done, then the mind is very clear that what path should the society take, or the people who are managing the society should take. They should understand the feeling of the person who is getting hurt somewhere or the other. That hurt can be physical, that hurt can be mental. And if you see yourself in that position, then you can determine and you can actually pick up the right course. And everybody in the society has a role to play. One of the biggest role is the persons who manage the society. And in a society of the world today, well, some place it is the king, or it's a government, or it's a law enforcing agency, or it can be a local government, it can be in the hospital, doctors, it can be in a classroom, the teacher. And therefore, there has to be certain amount of codification done as to what ought to be done by the person in that chair, the person who deals with policy formulation, the person who's in the judiciary, what should be done by him, how should he take the correct path to obviate the difficulties of the person in pain. And this empathy has to be brought in by training. And an institution like this can play a huge role of training various people who are the stakeholders, or who are the persons who will be disputing or bringing out justice, person who will be curing the person. A person can become a victim because of certain traits of malevolence. Is there a psychological reason? Is there an economic reason? Is there plain malafide or criminal reasons? Now, if there is a psychological reason, can the person who perpetrates terror or any kind of malevolent behavior, can he be cured? If so, do we have organizations which can identify such traits and then take a curative manner? On the other hand, the victim does the victim require psychological attention? And so that he or she can get out of the torment that she has faced? If so, can it be done? Is there a curative element or a place available near? So that's also another type of training which it requires. And I would say that in India, because it's such a varied, India is a world, from you can say Cyprus to Turkey to Finland. The amount of races, the cultures, language, religion that you have is all found in India, from north to south and east to west. So India is a continent of people, and therefore the behavior is different everywhere, and a person who is mitigating justice must understand this. There is a subject, anthropology, which is extremely important in the training of people who have to practice the art of governance. And this is a subject which is now fairly neglected. So we don't know the difference between a person of a particular tribe, like what General A.K. Singh mentioned, these tribes, Jarawas or Onges, the population is coming down. The biggest challenge which the tribe faces, even if it can't articulate, is how to maintain their own identity. And if there's no identity, then there's no tribe, then the world is gone. So we got to know about all this. We meaning the other part of the world who's supposed to help them or who's supposed to serve them. Who's supposed to serve according to Swami Vivekananda, whose God are these people? So we got to know, and therefore this subject, anthropology, also becomes a partner for psychology. And people should sort of go deeper inside the mind of the person who commits the atrocity or who commits the foul methods, and the mind of the victim or the victim society. People have victimized others because of race, because of language, because of color of the skin, because of their gender, because they are very young or because they are very old. And therefore we can classify the whole world into two parts, one who's a victim and one who's not a victim. And if you see, when you really start scanning the world, victims can be found in one's own family. I've seen many places where there is no communication between the oldest members of the family, the grandparents, and the others, and they literally are alone, trying to, even if they're staying in the same house, trying to communicate, but they're out of sync. And as India becomes more and more urban, and our joint families disappear, and people become in single status, this is becoming more pronounced. So the kind of familial protection which was available to either to the very young or to the very old is also disappearing. So the time of is not really a time of transition. It's a time when people actually have to frame out what should be the course, and thereby sort of identify the actions to be taken. And one action is very, very clear, that there has to be greater counseling. The counselors need training. There has to be a quick adjudication by the law authorities, by the police, by the legal people, and therefore they require to be trained. And then above all, the society requires to be trained so that they can become tolerant. And as Dr. Michael said, a tolerant society is absolutely essential. How do you do that? You can't just hope to God that people will be tolerant. And in India, we used to call it that we have to have a sanskar. Sanskar means the way you are brought up, the way your upbringing in. That sanskar should tell you to be tolerant. Because they can be victims in your own family. Therefore, don't go in searching, victims at a long distance. And if they are there in your own family, then for heaven's sake, be tolerant towards the others, because someday you might become a victim. And I say this very often to many people, that don't laugh. You might become a victim. And you will never know that why did it happen. So please, for heaven's sake, be tolerant and help at the time when you want. I'll give you a small example. This is about Second World War. the Allies had just landed in the Normandy. And one of the troops were of Gurkha soldiers, Indian Army's Gurkha soldiers. The Gurkhas fight with rifle on one hand and a sword, kukri on the other. So this chap landed and started running, and he yelled a war cry, and in a swift motion cut the hand of a German soldier. But after cutting the hand, he recalled that his training says the wounded have to be cared for. So then he took the German soldier, made an improvised stretcher, called some of his colleagues, and put the hand, severed hand, on the side, and all through, and they were running towards the nearest medical station. And all through the time, this Gurkha soldier was telling in his own language to the German wounded soldier that don't worry, we'll take you to a hospital and you'll be all right. Now that is the attitude. Even to our enemy, for heaven's sake, be human. So that's it. And if it's a good training, good sanskar, then you do it. I must end over here because I think today is a beautiful day, both outside and I'm absolutely sure within the premises of this hallowed precinct. So I wish you all very best, and I thank Dr. Sani and all his colleagues that assembled this gathering like this and called Witekampt. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Professor Dutt. Those were indeed very powerful words. Victimology, as I understand, does exist as a disparity in power, and there's always going to be this kind of dynamics in power. There needs to be for the world to exist and move on towards development. But what you said today here is the crux of it, that the empowered, whether we call it power or privilege, need to be empathetic, kind, and I think if at our individual level, I think this is what I was talking with Jahan yesterday, that if we could just at the individual level start being that and teaching that to our kids, our students, and whoever we come across, we could make a difference in the world. Thank you very much. And now, may I please invite Professor Dr. Jyoti Kirchhoff on stage.
Dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen, friends, I'm very happy and very proud and humbled that I can speak to you at this morning, at the opening of the conference. The conference being like a fair where you have an exhibition of all the colorful realizations of victimologically relevant programs. While parallel we have a course where in a small group of 50 others we analyze scientifically what is here exhibited. I cannot welcome every single one of you, but I would like to point out one group. That is the Indonesian group. These are more or less all teachers, all professors of victimology. And the Indonesians have a way of organizing their teaching, their bringing the victimology into the classrooms that is unique in the world. They do not have a society for victimology, but they have an association of the professors of victimology. And they are now in the second generation with Saitati, and his friends have given the torch to a new group, and that is very successful. I'm very glad that you are here. I always said, if we do not bring victimology in the classrooms of the university, our knowledge will go with us into the tomb, into the grave. And therefore it is a very, very worthwhile aim of the whole thing, to teach, to bring it to the students. And I'm very, very happy and grateful that Global Jindal University does such an intense attempt to do that. That is necessary and that needs all support. And I'm glad that we have this support. And I wish you a wonderful conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and that brings us to the end of the inaugural ceremony, and with this we are finally going to start our first session of the day, our plenary speakers. So may I please request, but before we head off, may I please request Rahul to please, Dr. Sani and Lieutenant General Singh, may I please request you to offer tokens and souvenirs from Jindal University to Mr. McConnell and Mr. Black. What Dr. Sani is telling is that this is our official Jindal scarf, quite colourful but also very, very warm. Thank you, sirs. While we await the stage to be set up for the first plenary session, I wish you all good luck. For those who have presentations and talks lined up for the next 2 days, I hope you have 2 wonderful, fruitful days. We at Jindal are very glad to be hosting this, and we welcome you, and we hope that you're enjoying our arrangements. We've had to make because this is an ongoing semester, we've had to try to adjust everything with you and the ongoing classes that are happening across the university. So if there are any issues that you face, if there are any problems, please feel free to approach one of our members. They probably look very busy at running around, so you know they are Jindal people. Please feel free to approach them for anything that you need. We are very happy to help you. And Panu's asked me to convey 2 important instructions. Because we're already running a bit late, 10 minutes, not too bad, but we assume that that could be a precedent for the next, that could delay the next few sessions. The speakers, could you please submit your presentations at the hall an hour before your next sessions? Of course not now, but I think the hall numbers are already given. It's T375 seaters, T2060 seaters, I know you don't know where it is, so just step out and ask our volunteers. And for those who are speaking, if you would just submit your presentations on the laptop in the halls, it would make the session progress much more smoothly. And want a certificate of participation, we would like to inform you that we're not giving out a hard copy. You will receive one in your email, a formal letter of participation, and I think that would work perfectly fine as well. Meanwhile, if I can just request Professor Robert Paecock and Professor Witekampt to please join us on stage for the first. Professor Paecock, please. I understand that some of you need to stretch your legs, but we would greatly appreciate if you could quickly step out and then come back in for the plenary session. Dr. Sani previously mentioned our association with the World Society of Victimology, one of the potent bodies that does work in victimology scholarship. He also mentioned how we have hosted Professor Marc earlier this week. And we had on stage Professor Vivekananda. And now we have Professor Robert Paecock, the Vice President of the World Society of Victimology and Professor in the Department of Criminology at the University of Free State. He has received a number of awards and serves regularly on various scientific committees and boards. He's been working actively in the field of victimology, with child justice and institutional victimization as particular focus areas, seeking to advance justice on the African continent and elsewhere. We're very happy to have him here. He's been part of our resource faculty for the course as well, and is our chair for this session. And I would request him to come up to the mic and please introduce Professor Vivekananda.
Good morning, dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen. As we said, in our country, my country, South Africa, observing all protocols. Thank you for that very generous and warm introduction. It's wonderful being here with you, also participating in the course. It is my honor this morning to introduce to you our very first keynote speaker, Professor Dr. Witekampt of the 6th Conference on Victim Assistance. Now, Dr. Witekampt is a professor in the Institute of Criminology at the University of Tübingen in Germany. He holds a PhD in criminology, and he's also from the graduate group of managerial sciences and applied economics at the Wharton School in the United States. He has studied under the famous Martin Wolfgang, and he has a number of publications and contributions in the field of international criminal justice. Professor Witekampt is also a fellow executive committee member of the World Society of Victimology, He's a course director for a number of years of the Brothly course, and he's also the course director of the African course. He has received the G.O.W. Mueller Award for outstanding contributions. He has an honorary senior fellowship within the Department of Criminology, the University of Melbourne, Australia, and a Fulbright scholarship. And these are just to mention a few. I can continue. Recently, Professor Witekampt has been involved with a series on transitional justice, where he's working together at the University of Leuven in Belgium, where he and other colleagues are continuing with their pioneering work, especially within the field of restorative justice, and also with specific reference to victims of mass victimization and transitional justice. He's a serious, finally, he is the serious editor of a particular section on transitional justice, which is published by Intersentia in Antwerp, Cambridge, as well as in Portland. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to give to you our first keynote speaker, Professor Dr. Robert Paecock. Thank you.
I didn't know I was so short that I need a podium. Okay, here we go. And I always start my lecture. Some of you have heard it before, that the father of Professor Marc Grojhuisen told him once, if you cannot use your head, use overhead. And I added to that, and if you cannot come to the point, use PowerPoint. I will use neither one of those, and I will just try to use my head as good as possible. So I will take you today on a journey of restorative justice. I will start at the beginning of humankind, and I will hopefully being able to end up at the new endeavors of restorative justice, which is more or less peacemaking and dealing with the past after the violent offenses. So if you go back into humankind, at the beginning of humankind, we found in acephalus means states without a head, without a king, without a leader, that they had four kinds of ways on how to deal with conflicts. The first one was blood revenge. I learned last week that blood revenge is still here in India. In Europe, it is in the country of Albania where we still have it. But if you look at literature and descriptions of blood feuds, you find out that every society had always a way on how to avoid them and to end them, which is even more important, because what a blood feud means that if I would kill somebody from a clan of somebody here in the room, then his or her family would be obliged to kill somebody from my family, and then it goes on and on and on, and soon you don't have anybody left. And families or clans are distinguished. So the ancestors were very wise, in my opinion. They tried to avoid it as much as possible because they knew it was very counterproductive. The second form of conflict resolution in the early days was retribution, and retribution was equally dangerous to the clans because it very often involved that they expelled offenders from their tribe, from their village, from their community, and they were not allowed to come back for a long time, which was also very counterproductive for the communities because they needed every member to survive. The third method they used was ritual satisfaction, which is that they introduced forms of or rituals in which they could provide justice to the people who were involved in the conflict, and then they could return to a happy village life ever after. And the fourth and the major form of conflict resolution was restitution, meaning that the conflict was settled by an agreement between the families of the victim and the offender, and for a settlement which could be money or services towards the family of the victim. And that was the most common form for centuries to come. And even though we are here at the global law school, Jindal law school, many people believe that we have penal law forever, which is absolutely wrong. Penal law is a very newly developed discipline and was not around for too long. Lawyers always make us believe that that is the case, but it's not the truth. And therefore, restitution disappeared from the field of settling conflicts for ever since the 12th century, because in the 12th century the states claimed that the offense was an offense against the state, or the king, or the emperor, or the pope, whoever was in power, and that it was the state's obligation to punish. And they invented prosecutors, judges, lawyers, and what have you. And so they started then to take over the conflicts in their hands. Which leads me to a very famous criminologist, Niels Christie, Professor Niels Christie from Norway, who was once invited a long time ago to give the opening speech at the University of Sheffield in England at the opening of a criminology program there. And he gave a very famous speech with a title called Others, People, Property, in which he argued that when the state took away the conflicts from the people, that was a very big mistake. And the state has to give back the conflicts to the people, because he argued that the people are much better equipped to solve problems than the state is. And so that was a very famous speech, and which was leading then in many countries to the reinstitution of restorative justice matters in terms of restitution, and then in the 1950s in Europe and the US and Canada to the introduction of victim-offender mediation. Victim-offender mediation was first reintroduced in Canada, in the city of Kitchener, Ontario, where a juvenile judge got so upset because he got the same offenders in front of his bench time after time, and he got really fed up with it, and he gathered his crew there, his court workers, probation workers, parole officers, and they then decided what to do, and then they suggested, let's take the kids to the, they had a series of vandalism in the community of Kitchener. Let's take the kids there, and they have to apologize towards the victims, and then they have to repair the damage done. And that's what they did. The social workers threw the kids in the back of the car, drove them to the community. they had to go and then face the victims face to face themselves, and they said that they apologized and that they then would repair the damage done, which was graffiti in most cases, so they would remove the graffiti, and then if the victims were satisfied, this case could be closed by the judge. And that worked quite well. It is very interesting to know that at the same time when they introduced this form of victim offender mediation in the US and Canada, it was also introduced on a large scale in Europe, mainly in countries like Austria, Belgium, Germany only to a small degree, and the Scandinavian countries like Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland. And they seemed to work quite nicely for a while, but then happened what happens very often in the US American system, that they want to show, that they want to see progress and success after a very short period of time. And of course, for that, researchers found out the best offenders they could find for victim offender mediation were property offenders, first-time offenders, and nothing serious, because they could be handled in a very fashionable and fast way and could then be treated as successful cases. So that happened, but since many programs couldn't show this success rate, they very often closed down those programs. In Europe, we had a slightly different trend because it was countries like Austria, Belgium, and Norway, where they tried very innovative modes of victim offender mediation, like they introduced the mixed double, which is that you have, in a case you have two, not only the offender, the mediator, but also the offender, the victim, and the mediator. Instead of one mediator, they are using two mediators, a female and a male, in order to have a gender balance in the meetings. So how does it work, victim offender mediation? It usually is that a mediator contacts the victim, the offender offers the service of a mediation, and then if it works, they meet and the mediator intervenes and is an intermediary also between the courts and the prosecutor. In successful cases, when they find an agreement, which is usually some form of restitution, then the mediator is also supervising the if the offender paid what he was supposed to pay, or if he fulfilled the services he was supposed to deliver. So victim offender mediation is more or less the most common form of restorative justice today. It could be doing much better. In Germany we estimate, for instance, that it could be handled in more than 600,000 cases per year, and we are far away from that. So numbers are much lower. I belong to a research group in Germany where we collect data on victim offender mediation. We have collected now about 5,000 cases so far, where we asked about, we have a special questionnaire about the offender, about the victim, and about the crime which was committed. And when we analyzed those data, it looked at what has been agreed upon in these cases. We found, to our big surprise, that the most common form of agreement between victim and offender was that the offender apologized sincerely towards the victim, and most victims do not want more. They just want to be acknowledged, and they want to know that
something bad has happened to them or was done to them, and that the offender shows some form of remorse. So that's what happens in victim-offender mediation. And then in 1989, which is a very important year, the country of New Zealand and of Australia discovered that they had a disproportionately high number of indigenous people, the Maoris in New Zealand, the Aboriginals in Australia, in their pre-trial detention facilities, and as a result they had a very high death rate of juveniles in those facilities. And they said they got alarmed by this development, and then they said we have to do something about it. So they consulted them with the elders of the Maoris and the Aboriginals and found out that you can't do anything worse to an indigenous person than lock him up. If you lock them up, they are dying, because they are used to go around running in the forests, fish the waters, and so on. And the worst thing for them is if you lock them up and they cannot see the sun anymore. And one of the most prominent supporters of restorative justice is Professor John Braithwaite from Australia. He always tells the story. If you today would give a lot of Australian juveniles who are in pre-trial detention a choice of somebody throwing some little arrows against them, and you just give them a board of wood to defend themselves, they would prefer that kind of treatment than getting locked up. So that shows you how much truth is in that. For you. So, and then when they got together in New Zealand and in Australia, they formed what we call today family group conferences. And family group conferences is that you not only invite to the meeting the offender, the victim, but also their families and friends or supporters. And that is very important, because then you shift the burden of fulfilling also the agreements, not only to the offender but also to their families. And the families of the victim and the offender have to agree both of it. And that's usually done through a ceremony or a common meal whatsoever. Family group conferences are working quite well as far as we know today. New Zealand is the only country in the world by now which is using family group conferences for all crimes committed by juveniles. So all juvenile offenses are going to a family group conference, which is a meeting of people who are working in that area, and they decide then if a conference can be conducted, and then they ask a facilitator to run the conference. The only exception to that, every crime is being handled by a family group conference, is that in cases of homicide. In cases of homicide, they still use the old traditional court as it was introduced by the British in New Zealand. The Australians have a very similar approach, with the exception that they involve very often also the police or police officers in the work of the conferences. And that is highly contradictory in terms of the restorative justice community, because many people think you shouldn't mix the roles of the police, who are supposed to prevent crime and catch criminals, and they shouldn't then be involved in handling conferences. Anyway, they both are very successful, and during my tenure at the University of Leuven in Belgium, one of my colleagues, Professor Walgrabe, he was on sabbatical in Australia and in New Zealand, and he got so intrigued by what he saw there that he came back and he said, I have to introduce this to the Belgium system. And he was lucky, he got some supportive money from the King Baudouin Foundation, and then he flew in prosecutors and judges from New Zealand to Belgium, who trained them their Belgian counterparts, and then he also flew the Belgians to New Zealand to learn how to do it in practice. And they came back, and it is now, believe it or not, it is now part of the Belgian juvenile law that they can do these family group conferences even in cases of serious crimes. Which brings me to my next point, serious crimes. It was always argued, I told you before, in the US and Canada, they used first-time offenders, property offenders, to use them for mediation processes. Because it was very often argued that you cannot do this in cases of very serious crimes. That is not true. In my belief, and I'm a true believer in it, you can handle every kind of crime by some form of restorative justice. To give you an example, my colleague Marc Grojhuisen at the University of Minnesota, he handles very serious cases. The most serious ones are in cases when a child gets killed and leaves a family behind. And then in those cases, he introduced also victim offender mediation, and I'll give you an example. There's a very famous case where he was approached by an offender who was serving a death row sentence in Huntsville, Texas, and he had killed a young woman in Minnesota, and he was caught and then sentenced to death. And he approached him and his team, as well as the mother of the killed young lady, and asked to conduct a mediation process. So they prepared the lady, which can take up to months, maybe half a year if necessary, whatever. Then they flew with her down to Texas to meet with the offender on death row, and the lady collapsed more or less. She couldn't handle the psychological pressure, and so they flew her back, trained her much more and longer, and returned them then to Texas, and they had a successful victim offender mediation session. Afterwards, they interviewed the offender what he thought about it, and he said he was quite happy to meet the lady or the mother of the person he killed, because he could explain to her a lot of things. Because what victims very often, they want to know why and how. Why was my husband killed or my wife, and how, and where are they buried? We find that very often in countries after violent conflicts, where victims really are interested in that, and not much more than that. So he said he was quite happy to explain it to her, why it happened, how it happened. And then they interviewed the mother, and the mother said then, I wish I would have participated in this much earlier, because then I could have been a much better mother to my other children, because she said she was so involved in grieving about losing one daughter that she almost forgot she had a few more kids to take care of. So that shows you that it can have quite an impact. And so much for family group conferencing. Family group conferencing, you find now also these days in some European countries, very shy and very hidden programs very often, but there is a movement towards it, and the Netherlands are pretty much ahead of all the other European countries in this context, and they have a very successful NGO which is called Eigenkracht, which means by your own power. And Then we come to, and that's the last form of restorative justice, which is my private favorite, which are the peace circles. Peace circles were developed by the native Indians in Canada and in the US. And what that is, that they, according to their old rules and teaching, is when they have a conflict, the whole community gathers in a circle, in a big circle. We could have here a very big one. Here the largest one I personally attended in my life was with over 120 people. And you might think this is crazy. It's not at all crazy. It works very well because what they have is what they call a talking piece. Like this could be anything. It used to be the feather of an eagle, and I have the pleasure and honor to own one because it was given to me by some native Indians from Canada after some peace circle training. And so this feather would then go around, and only the person who holds the feather is allowed to speak. All others have to listen. And if you don't want to say anything, you just pass the feather on to the next person in the circle. That's a very good way in enforcing people to listen again, because I think that's one thing we have lost in the last decades, that we listen to people, what they have to say and what they have to offer. And so that's how they conduct those peace circles. And I think they are a very successful way to do it. I myself wanted to introduce these peace circles in the European context, and it took me 10 years until I got the right money for it from the European Union, and I ran a 3-year pilot project in Germany, in Belgium, and in Hungary, where we were able to show that they can be introduced in the European context, and they could work quite nicely. And now I leave that field and I come to the field in which I work mostly today or these days, which is a combination between transitional justice and restorative justice. Transitional justice we call processes which are happening after violent conflicts or after war. What can you do in order to restore those communities and states again? And a good example for how it works, I can tell you, happened in Papua New Guinea, in Bougainville, the island of Bougainville, where they had a 30-year-old civil war going on, and then finally they got tired of it. The Australians intervened by military force, and then they set up and they went back to their old teachings. This was very similar to what I just explained to you about peace circles. And they went from village to village. They trained mediators on how to conduct these meetings, and they were very successful in achieving peace in the villages, in the small communities, and then in the whole state of Bougainville. And there's a nice book about it written by, I don't know, I have it with me somewhere, a person who was very much involved in the peace process of Bougainville. And the title of the book is Breaking Spears, Mending Hearts. So they throw away your weapons and follow your hearts. So that's one thing. So what I did with a colleague in Belgium, Professor Stéphane Parmentier, is we developed a model which we might be able to use in cases of state crime after violent conflicts. And we identified 4 dimensions which are utterly important according to what we found in the literature. The first one is trust, truth. Truth is the first one. And unfortunately, I have overheads with me, but I cannot use them here, so I have to use my head. So truth is the most important, a very important one, that you have to establish truth. What happened, how it happened, etc., etc. A good example for that is now what you see not far from here in Myanmar, where you have the conflict between the Roshani and the natives there, and some person from this university published a very interesting article about it, and it made it very, very clear that they were both talking different languages there. Either group had established their own truth, which is of course usually not the real truth, and that's why it's leading to a lot of misunderstandings between the parties, and that way you cannot establish any kind of peace procedure whatsoever. So the second dimension in our model is accountability. You have to figure out who did what to whom and why and so on. So you have to identify who did that. That is easier than establishing the truth. I can give you a very nice example of truth. We had in Germany, we had some terrorist group in the 1970s, the Red Brigades, and they killed our our Prosecutor General of Germany in a heinous attack. They killed him and his bodyguards and driver and what have you. They caught a number of these terrorists who were sentenced, and they all got like lifetime sentences, and which they usually in Germany you don't have to serve the whole time usually. And one of them, Holger Mainz, he asked for a presidential pardon not too long ago, a couple of years ago, and he asked the then acting German president for a presidential pardon so he could be released earlier. And then the son of one of the sons of the Prosecutor General of Germany, also Mr. Buback, he's a physics professor at the University of Göttingen. He made a big public outcry and he said, never ever will I allow that this guy will be released early, because he said, we still do not know what the truth is. Who pulled the trigger that killed my father? If I know that, then I might be able to think about that this person could be released in the future, but not now, unless we know what really happened and what the truth was. And this person, the president, denied the request for pardon, and he was released later on simple procedural grounds by the corrections department where he served his time. So that shows you that people are very much into what is truth, what can be done about it. And then the third dimension we have in our model is compensation, restitution, which is that you have to pay people for what they have suffered from. And a good example for that is the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the country where Robert is from. And he promised to keep me on track time-wise today, so I hope I'm doing fine. And what happened in South Africa was, after apartheid was ending, or when apartheid was ending, they agreed on a Truth and Reconciliation Commission there, and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was chaired by Desmond Tutu, a very famous Archbishop of Cape Town. And what they did is they established various forms of commissions in which they dealt with the past. One of the very controversial one was that they also had the procedure in one where the offenders who had killed people could come forward and testify about the truth or what had happened, and then they could, if it was proven to be all right and kosher, they were given then pardon, and they didn't have to serve any time in prison. So that is the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions were first established in South America and Central America, and we have now, I don't know, we are in the upper 40s now of Truth and Reconciliation. They have different names sometimes, but they more or less, the content-wise, they are the same. The latest one we had in Canada, which was about the children who were taken away from the natural parents because they were native Indians, and they were giving them to foster parents or to group homes where they very often got very terribly abused by people working there or their adoptive families. So that is that's Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, which are very popular and can be used in all kinds of or after violent conflicts. The next one I would expect we can see will be probably in Spain, because Spain also never dealt with their past according to the Franco regime or dictatorship, and they never worked it out. And there's a very famous book by Professor Grojhuisen, who wrote a book with the title All Things Pass Except the Past, where he argues very strongly you have to deal with your past, otherwise it will haunt you forever. The same happens right now in Germany. You all know we got united again in Germany in 1989, 1990, and right now we find, or they just have released a public report on sexually abused children in group homes in former East Germany. In East Germany, according to their philosophy of communism, such crimes did not exist, therefore they cannot be, and now we are working on the past by finding out it happened quite often, and it happened quite heavily, and lots of things need to be done to get rid of it. In other European countries, or you find also these kinds of commissions who deal with serious sexual abuses by church people. Like in Belgium, one of the bishops even had to step down because he was involved in one case as well. So that was, I think it was the Bishop of Antwerp, if I'm correct. Anyway, so they are important issues which can be dealt with. And then what we did then in our research is we wanted to know, can our model work in practice? So we developed a questionnaire, one questionnaire for the former Bosnia and Herzegovina after the Balkan conflict, and the other one for Serbia, where we conducted in each country about 1,000, distributed 1,000 questionnaires, where we asked them, did you suffer from victimizations? What kind of victimizations? How was your case handled? And was the way justice was done by the national courts or the international tribunal of former Yugoslavia? Was that the right way to achieve justice? And we had one open question in all of this, and that was reconciliation, which is part of the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, as well as many others. And so people wrote almost like novels about what they thought about what reconciliation meant in their opinion. And when we analyzed our data, we found out that we had forgotten completely about two more elements in our model, and they were, first of all, trauma work. So in countries like of violent conflicts, people suffer from a lot of trauma, and you have to do trauma work with the people to heal, to do healing. And I once presented this kind of stuff in Canada, and then we were talking about Rwanda, the mass atrocities there, and then one of the professors says, so what are you doing when you don't have any people who can teach trauma work or healing work after trauma? And I said, then you have to fly in people who are able to do it. Very simple answer. But it shows you that it is very important. And our second dimension which we added was trust. Because people said you cannot reconcile until you reach trust between the people. You have to build up trust between people, especially when they were enemies at a time, which happened a lot during the Balkan War, where former neighbors who married among each other all the time, all of a sudden went out and killed each other. So how do you explain that? And we wanted to know about the judicial procedures, how do they like them, and what kind of work can be done in that way. So very interesting results. We are preparing right now, after 10 years, a second round of surveys in those countries to see whether we can find any changes or whether it stays pretty much the same. So people want, what they want to know is the truth, to repeat myself, and they want to reconcile it to a certain degree. One country where it has been very successfully done is Northern Ireland. In Northern Ireland, where they had a 50, 60-year-old civil war between the Protestants and the Catholics, with lots of dead people. They have now formed, through peace circles, by the way, which were conducted in Belgium, in Leuven, at the Irish College of Europe, where they bring together people, families of victims, families of offenders, and community people, and they bring them together to start talking again with each other as a first step. Then they used to do cookings together, dancing together, making music together, etc., etc. So those are very important steps which they take slowly but surely, and in Northern Ireland they reached really some healing by this way. And I'm convinced that you can do this in most societies. We can see it now happening in the state of Colombia, where we have now also seen some peace process being successful, which brings me to Desmond Tutu, the Archbishop from Cape Town again. I had the pleasure once to meet him in Colombia at a peace conference where we were both speakers, and I must say I've never met such a charismatic man like him. I mean, he can play with the audiences like, it was just fantastic to see him in action. And I had the privilege to have breakfast with him every morning because we were housed in the same hotel. And he was telling me stories, one story after the next one.
Thank you very much, Professor Witekampt.
Okay.
I'm so sorry I've got to stop. I think we can listen to you.
Okay, here we go again.
Yes, there will be opportunity for a question. One or two short questions, ladies and gentlemen. Any questions for Professor Witekampt?
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you, Professor Witekampt and Professor Robert Paecock. That's the end of our first plenary session, very enlightening. Professor Witekampt's work is probably something we can all model in our countries, especially developing countries who are just stepping into the fringe of recognizing victim assistance as something that the government should be concentrating upon. I'm sure we will be emulating your surveys and scholarship. Thank you very much. We will move on to the parallel sessions which are happening in the, just for your information, towards this side, an audio on this side and audio on that side. But our volunteers are going to be standing outside to help you find the location, so you can just ask them. Meanwhile, we break for tea. Tea is available right outside. Thank you very much and have a very good day.
Hello Anjali. Hello. Hello Anthony. Oh. Is that a video or something? No.
I thought you were taking a video side. I feel bad. Tak apa.